the Guyana Series. Who are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Um, My name is Jerry Barry. I am a native of Guyana, of course, from the county of Bobis. Um, as, as long as I know myself, I've always wanted to be an artist, from even kindergarten. I mean, if I tell you a little story, when I was a kindergarten kid, my teacher arrested me and took me to the headmaster. We used to call them headmasters then. Because she discovered that I had been using my workbook to draw things in. I had turned the book to the opposite side and I was drawing from the back, coming to the front, just drawing everything that interested me, including herself. And when she took me to the to the headmaster, he, that was when my first encouragement started. He was just elated by what he saw. Uh, I went on that way all through to high school, still wanting to be an artist. I had this firing desire. As a matter of fact, I told my teachers when I was very small that I want to be an art teacher. And everybody laughed because there was no such thing as an art teacher in those days. Um, and art was never really recognized as a profession. When I left high school, although I did very well in my academics, I chose to become a commercial artist, go straight into the art field. And I remember I started working as a sign painter and, and, um, and with one Mr. Basil Thompson for the Demerara Tobacco Company. We were making these huge billboards advertising cigarettes. Um, However, I always had a desire to teach. I said I want to teach because I wanted to learn more. I want to learn more, not only about art, but academically. So when I got a chance um, to enter the Teachers Training College, um, Guyana had started to a new batch. They, they were starting the multilateral school system. And they had to train some special art teachers, specialist teachers for these schools. And I was among the first batch of them that went out for training. The college it was a new college that started called the Lillian Joe College of Education. And I was among them. The first batch of training of trained secondary teachers, specifically trained for these schools. Well, when we graduated, I taught first at Rosignol Secondary School. Then I was appointed head of the art department of the multilateral school in Rhineville, in Georgetown. Well, that was when my career really took off. But even before that, I had been really creating waves, doing drawings. I would do a lot of sketches in the countryside. Um, I was really following my passion for drawing. And when I went to Rhineville Multilateral School, it was a crossroad in my life and my career because I had to design art activities for children when I myself was learning some of the things that I am intending to teach. So I would say that teaching shaped me as an artist as much as art shaped me as a teacher. Because whatever I had to teach my children, I really put everything into it, all my passion into it. Because in the end, I realized that I was actually teaching myself these things. So at the multilateral schools, there were all kinds of equipments and so on for the teaching of art, like printmaking, leather craft, uh, all kinds of ceramics. We had the wheel turning. Most of these things I did not know myself. I had to learn them on the spot, teaching. And I wanted my children to be enthused. So I made myself the target of my profession. I had to learn it. And I made my children the target of my enthusiasm. They must enjoy it. So when eventually I got a scholarship to study for my art education, I went to university in the United States and I studied, got my bachelor's in art education. I showed, I really focused on curriculum. I really wanted to learn how to design activities for children. I came back, when I came back, I became a lecturer at the Teachers College. I did that for 5 years, now having a good time training art teachers. Then eventually I was appointed chief instructor, principal for the Borough School of Art. I stayed there for 3 years. There again, you can see that the enthusiasm just kept building all the time. Because this time I was dealing with craftsmen, I was dealing with other artists, I was all over. As a matter of fact, I started the first set of leather illustration. I took leather and did leather carving, leather crafting, and did the first set of leather pictures about our native Amerindians. That was very, very popular. I think it was a place called the House Proud that I used to send my work to. In 1988, eventually, you know, I wanted to move on, and so I resigned from the Borough School of Art, and I started freelancing as an artist in Guyana and the Caribbean. I went to Trinidad, Tobago, Barbados, and then eventually I immigrated to the United States and started again, teaching again. There I fell for the Central Park. I saw an opportunity to get back into my drawing when, as I lived in Brooklyn, I went to Prospect Park and I saw these beautiful landscape opportunities, and I started sketching again. And eventually, I finished a series of paintings called the Park Series. But there was one side of me that when I graduated as a teacher, not only of art but of English, specialist in teaching of English. So I was an English teacher for quite some while. In the United States, I was a special ed teacher for a while, and I specialized in teaching. And then I went to Brooklyn, Long Island University, and I did a degree in special education. I taught in New York City's public schools. But with all of this, I was a writer, poet. I used to do a lot of deep thinking and writing, and eventually I ended up in Connecticut. Ended up teaching art there for a number of years.
So tell us, why do you paint?
At first, I would basically say it's because I can't help it. When you're an artist, you get driven. I get driven to do my drawing and painting. Well, just because it's in me. But I can tell you what got me started like that, and why it is that I got so enthused to paint. As a little boy, I would, go window shopping um, on Regent Street. Regent Street was one of the main shopping centers in Guyana, in Georgetown. And in the evening, families would walk down the Regent Street, just doing window shopping, seeing what's there. And there was this place called the Amex House. I remember Amex House distinctly for only one thing, and that was they had a showcase in which there were two paintings. One's a painting of moonlight scene, and the other one is of some men just in a canoe in a stream paddling past some houses. I could not help but come to watch these paintings. For me, they look even better than a real life picture. It was so well executed, and the paint had such a life about it. I would come every day just to see the Amex House paintings. And every time I came there, I got more and more obsessed with it. It was then perhaps when I realized that that is what I want to do. I never used to paint then. I didn't even know what oil painting was. I just wanted to paint. And I started with watercolors and so on and so on. You know, you get fascinated with your talent and your skill to express yourself, what you see and what you feel. What I saw in the Amex House showcase made me so moved that I had to do the same thing. So it became a childhood passion. So drawing the countryside and seeing these beautiful scenes, there was nothing spectacular about a country scene with some kids playing in the moonlight, but somehow it got me so obsessed that I love the country, and I am from the country. The country is in me. So what I did, I started going into the country, sketching whatever scene I could. But back to the question about why I paint. As you grow older, as you get older, you get more mature, you develop a passion, and you develop that sense of responsibility. At first, you did it for the love of it, and then afterwards you realize that you wanted to do it for another reason. That is that crossroad you arrive when you begin to the philosophical component of your artwork begins to take shape. You begin to say, well, why am I putting this? Why am I doing this? Why do I want my painting to look this way? And that begins to shape what you do. So at first, when you paint, it is the how part of it. How you're going to get it right. How you're going to do it as you do your nice pictures. But then afterwards, it becomes a really serious matter. You begin to look at painting as a serious activity. That is what happened to me. You begin to take your art to the next level. No one has to drive you to take it. You know what you want to achieve. And sometimes you can't even explain to anyone else but yourself what you're trying to achieve. One of the things that I think drives me, I don't think, I know what drives me, is that there's a meaning that is behind every picture. Every picture has a story, and every story has a picture. Well, for me, a simple scene that you may look at may be saying something back at you. And this is what I think, as an artist, I try to reflect in my work. What it said to me. Someone looks at the painting, they may not see that. They may see something else what it says to them, but they got to it by what the painting said to me, what I was trying to tell myself through my painting as I do it. So painting is not just a matter of taking the paint and putting it onto the canvas, whether it's or paper, whether it's watercolor or what. It is a part of you every time you touch the canvas, every time you draw a line and you lay out a picture. You are saying something from yourself, from deep within your heart.
Well, how do you go about selecting your images or scenes to paint?
Well, a scene sometimes, or in most cases, I would say in my case, um, a scene would just dramatically grab my attention. But it is not just because it is a place in the country or when. I love the beauty and drama of nature. Um, I keep repeating that I'm from the country. So I'm accustomed to seeing some of the most magnificent sunsets and sunrises. Even, even the midday sun, the light, is very, very dramatic for me. Because when you see what the light does with the scene, or even with a person, or with people in the light, you can't help. Though I know lots of people, they're not interested in that. They don't see that. They see it when an artist represents it. In most of my paintings, you can see, well, I would say, you could see three things. You could see a very, very strong attachment to light, like sunsets, shadows, reflections in the water. You will see a lot of water reflections because I love water. Guyana, the name Guyana means land of many waters. And sometimes in the rainy season, you get some mild flooding. But there is nothing more beautiful than to see the water there, the light reflecting in the water, and the images of scenes reflecting in the flood or in the streams. So you will notice a lot of that in my painting. And the third thing that you will find a lot in my work, I love the ordinary people, ordinary life, the ordinary country people. Somebody, a fisherman pulling up his seine, or feeling for a fish, or doing something, or cutting cane, or some of the old genres, farmer bringing home his cows and these kinds of things, working in the fields. I love it, especially at the end of day or the beginning of day. Light always plays a very, very dramatic part of most of what I do in my painting. So, you see, as I said before, every painting has a message, has a story. And the visual messages that register from a painting are the strongest that could capture the human mind. So the scene actually captivates me as I am captivated by the moment. A scene when you look at a scene, it is not just a picture. It is an experience. That is for me. And so as I go through this experience, I try to absorb this experience into my system. Even as I sketch, that's what I'm doing. I'm absorbing the drama, the light, the experience of what the scene is saying to me. And then I take that home. And then I create my painting from it. So when I create the painting, I create the painting to bring back that message that I had felt, that experience that I had when I was watching at the scene and sketching it.
What is the Guyana Series?
For me, this is one of the most important collection of paintings I have ever done and possibly will ever do. Um, I say one of because I have another one, the transition. But the Guyana series comes from a number of sketches of some of my most uh, favorite scenes that I did when I lived in the country. Um, I, when I first started to teach after I graduated from college, I made a resolution to do at least 5 sketches every day. 2 in the morning, 2 in the evening, and at least one at midday. And I must find somewhere worthwhile to sketch. And so I would take my bicycle and I would go riding looking for scenes. Sometimes I did that the day before, looking for the scene, and then I would come back there early in the morning to sketch it before I go to work. And in the evening after work, I would find that scene before sundown when the light is at its best in the evening sunset, and then I would capture the scene. Um, Moonlights I never missed. And so by the time I left Rosignol Secondary School and I became head of the Department of Multilateral School in Renville, I had tons and tons of sketches from the country. Even in Georgetown, I would continue riding around looking for scenes to sketch in Georgetown. And this, when I came to the United States, I wanted to refine my skills a little more in painting. Attend university, do all kind, get to learn as much as I could about painting, then do these sketches. And so I did attend the Hartford Art School. I got my MFA there, and while I was there, I started to execute my Guyana pieces. So everything that I have learned, I've researched, and so on for myself, experimented in my studio, I would now do some final paintings. Uh, in 2006, I had done a series of studies, and I had brought it to the Guyana Museum um, um, there, just as a refresher. But these paintings are the final resolutions of all my efforts of the sketches I have done over the years. They should be, I always felt they would, I counted them up, they would have been 24, but I have not finished them yet. Some of them are in the making. So what you are about to see are just the first set of them that I have completed so far. Okay. The reason why I did these pieces, for 3 reasons. First of all, I need to get these sketches off my chest because I would move on to something else. I'm moving on to some other studies in painting that I want to do. But more important, I wanted these sketches, these paintings, to be models of artistic and studio achievements to inspire young artists. I had been a lecturer, I had been a principal at the Borough School of Art. I have had lots of contact with artists. I always wanted to help them. There was no better way I felt I could have helped them but to give them something that they can look up to. So I wanted to make myself a model of what they can achieve. And if possible, help them in workshops or whatever. I'm willing to teach everything I know to them. The other one is to leave a legacy of these scenes that are disappearing very, very quickly. Modernism is taking over. And when I return to some of these scenes, there's nothing there. Many of those houses are gone, of course. The old little cottages that looked so beautiful at the time, they're all gone. They're being replaced by these large concrete structures, and the modern house, and so on and so on. You would hardly find me drawing a painting of a modern house. To me, it has no fascination. Give me the old country. My friends, my other artist colleagues, they used to call me the old house artist. I said, that's fine with me. I'll be the old house artist for you. And the other reason also that I'm painting these is to raise the bar of creative endeavors among young people. Not just to paint a picture. It's okay to learn to do pictures because you're talented and so on and so on. But for them to take it a little further, take it a little further. Be unique. Be unique in in your style, in what you're doing, and try to accomplish something. Not to copy a Barry or copy a Rembrandt or copy a Picasso or whatever. Be yourself. That's a beautiful thing about being self-taught. I'm a self-taught artist. Even though I went to university and so on, I taught myself most of the things I know. Learning is a creative experience, and art is a creative endeavor. I would love to see these scenes stimulate young people to really look back at their country with a different eye and really see that the country is really beautiful.
Do you have any particular style or technique?
I've always heard it said that an artist is known by his style. I was one of those who wasn't particularly convinced by that because I have experimented in so many different styles. For me, the message or the scene dictates the style. If we are talking about technique, that is studio techniques, like watercolor, particular type approach in oil painting, like glazing or whatever, smudging. That's a different matter. But where style is concerned, I have explored a variety of um, expressions in my work that people have said is my style. I wasn't as convinced as they were. But if I were to explain some styles that I use, one of them, my main fingerprint, the mark of my work is my palette knife. Most of my work, I use the palette knife. I started with the brush, of course, painting heavily impasto with the brush. And then one day I stumbled upon this technique by accident. I was demonstrating something to one of my students, and then I just went off using the palette knife. And since I did so, for a number of years, I did nothing else with the brush. I just focused on using the palette knife. Now, in those days when I used the palette knife, I used to use it very heavily. You will see it in the paintings I will show you a little later. I used to use the paint very heavily. It was like modeling the paint and forming the images with the paint. I am a sculptor too, so it was perhaps the sculptor in me that got me there. Then there is another style, approach, type of expression I would call the refraction series. A friend of mine gave me a glimpse of a diamond, he thought I thought I knew a diamond. He thought so too. He said, no, 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 I don't think you ever really saw a diamond. And he showed me a diamond. He gave me this little instrument to take a look at the diamond. And what I saw there really, really fascinated me as an artist. And from then on, I started to see if I could incorporate this refraction of light in the diamond through my landscape or through every drawing that I did. And that became a style that I call the light refraction style. But it was no light refraction. It was just that I was playing around. I was having fun with the concept of a diamond and trying to look at my landscape through the lens of a diamond. That was all there was to it. There was no particular fancy thing. But one of the things you will notice that most of my work is dominated by light and reflections. You will always see some strong light penetrating somewhere and some reflection or shadow or something like that, because I love the drama of light. And finally, uh, I, I used to go sketching. And when I go say, I would seek a vantage point or a viewpoint from which you will best represent that scene. I got better at doing that as I matured more as an artist. And so I developed this strategy or technique I call the third eye technique. That is, I take a vantage point of my landscape uh, that would that would cause the viewer to think he or she is part of the landscape. In other words, I make you feel as though you are in the picture and not just looking at the picture. So I went to pains to make certain I pick a vantage point where I could plant your feet right into the scene. Or even if I do an image of a person, it's as if the person is right in your face. So you can't help but interact. So that makes the paintings or the scenes more interactive. So that is what influences most of my artistic expressions, layouts, and even the techniques that I use. My studio techniques are therefore subordinate to those things. I use my studio technique to enhance those things.
Tell us about your early impasto paintings.
The early impasto paintings are really palette knife executions. In other words, instead of using the brush to apply the paint very thick in an expressionist kind of manner, I would form I would form the images using the palette knife. It, it, it is like it's like applying the paint very, very thick and then modeling the images, forming the leaves, the trees, the texture, the grass. All of these were done by manipulating the knife to give the form of the image that I'm trying to get. Now, it can get very difficult sometimes to make paint look liquid or paint look very light or reflect like water, liquid like water. And so that was my struggle over the years as I did it. What I wanted the image to stand out dramatically out of the painting in 3D. I am a sculptor, and maybe it's a sculptor in me that worked on my subconscious there, and so I love the texture of the paint. So you will see in in most of my early works, I had they were heavily laden with the paint. Incidentally, there's very little sketching that I did when I did these paintings. I just put a framework of the sketch because it was useless to do that. I would start at one particular area and I would just model the paint into the painting as I actually formed the images into the painting. That's the only way, at least I felt it could have been done at the time. So this scene is called Scene from the Backlist. I had gone to visit someone in that White House there in the distance. And while my family were having a nice time, I stepped out, crossed the bridge, and sat at the side of the road, and I was sketching the area. I took the opportunity to do some sketching. And I did this scene a number of times. So this was my final rendition of that scene called The Scene from the Backlist. And the Backlist is a village on the east coast of Demerara in Guyana. Moonlight. The house with the light in that corner there, that was the last place I stayed in Guyana before I left to the United States. And I was sitting on the porch that day when and saw the moon rising, and it was such a dramatic scene. It was one of the things that always fascinated me about moonlight. In Guyana, in the tropics there, when the moon is rising, is a huge orange moon. That is something, it's a magnificent thing to see, rising above from the horizon. And I couldn't help it. I had to make sketches. I made sketches. Now, how do you paint a moonlight? You can't draw moonlight because you can't see color, you can't see shade. You hardly see anything. So a friend of mine told me, he said, it's impossible to paint a moonlight. And I said, oh yes? I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to show you I can do that. And so I got into this obsession with painting moonlights. Did a number of studies on moonlight. This is one of them, Rising Moon. I used the interior of the house, the light from the interior of the house, as a contrast to enable me to get the dark shade of the boards of the house and to create the drama of light and shade in the moonlight. But the whole idea was to capture the real feel and the mood of the scene. It was executed in my Orly palette knife style because I use a palette knife mostly. But then I started to transition gradually into doing some glazing with the brush to fill in, get a feeling of texture and softness in the painting. This painting is called Carlotta. Now, Carlotta is a real person. She's somebody that I know. She is from Lovely Lass on Borbis, on the Borbis coast. Lovely Lass is a little after Belladrum. And I used to visit them. When I visited them, Carlotta was a little girl, like 3 or 4 years of age. When I saw Carlotta again in the United States, this is how she looked. I was just fascinated. Carlotta, you have grown to be a very big, nice girl. Now, at the time, I was in college and I was doing life study. And my professor said, you can do a painting on anybody you choose. And I choose to do this painting on Carlotta, among other ones. So I did execute Carlotta mainly with the palette knife. Her pants, of course, were done in brush, and some of the other things were done in brush, the background in brush. But I wanted to get the feel, the solidness of Carlotta with the knife. And I wanted to see um, the portrait done with a palette knife, what it would look like. And so I really executed. But also, I wanted, when she looked at me, I am seeing somebody who, from the country, is now in the heart of Brooklyn. It's not Carlotta only I'm looking at all the other young girls and young people who came to this country in America, and and they're looking at their prospects. They're looking out at the world and what lots of things are being said in their faces. And so I'm just drawing her to your attention so that you can look at yourself through the eyes of Carlotta. Light in a tropical jungle. This is moonlight. Again, another moonlight. But the interesting thing about this painting is that it was executed in acrylic. Again, one of the challenges my friends gave me. He said you can never mix colors in acrylic. It's impossible to mix because before you finish mixing, the paint is dry. I said, no, you can control the mixing of the color. And I thought, the best way to do that is to do it in the palette knife. So what I would do, just as I do with my oil painting, when you get into the mixing of the paint, you don't pause or you don't hesitate. You just get into the mixing boldly. And this is what I did. That painting was started up on the top with the moonlight at the top there. And so I started mixing and blending the colors down in waves coming down as I came, creating the contrast as I came down. So there was no difficulty. It was just smooth sailing, mixing the colors, because when I reached another phase, all I had to do was just add another color, a blue or a red, into the colors that I use, and it became another phase. And it was a very academic approach to painting, but I tried to put a little creative impulse into it because I really wanted to present my home with this one Christmas. Pond lilies. Uh, most of us growing up in the coastlands know about, lotus and these lilies. They frequent the ponds and they can be very pervasive, of course. But what I remember most about lilies is in the early morning when they are opening up, when the flowers are opening up after they had gone to sleep the evening before. When they are first opening up, they send out a fragrance that can really perfume the air. I love that smell. When I lived in the country, we had a pond of lilies just near to our window, and every morning we look forward for this smell. I wanted to represent the beauty of the fauna of Guyana here in this painting. Actually, I took this study from the pond lilies at Banks DIH in Thirst Park. They have really nurtured a lily farm there right in front of the entrance of that brewery. And I always thought that they kept their lilies really, really nicely. So I decided to go there and do that. So I actually borrowed that scene from there, you see, and then I did my other things with it. Those are pond lilies. Now we are into the watercolors. This is a scene in Meadowbank, of course, old Meadowbank, uh, Meadowbank, just the sluice um, just near to the Torrance Park in Georgetown, where the fishermen go, and um, it's a fisherman's haven where the fishermen come in with their fish. And this is a scene that artists love to sketch. I am one of them. I used to come here. I must have done sketches of this place maybe 10 or 12 times and painted it 100 times from different directions. I did, I even did an oil painting of it. But this is the watercolor version of I call this House by the River. The fishermen would come in here, bring in their fish, and it would be interesting to come to Meadowbank and take sketches or take pictures of the men bringing in their fish and so on and so on. So I had to make this part of my collection because this is one of the scenes that will disappear forever. As a matter of fact, that house, I think, has been replaced already. See, and I think there is a huge fisheries wharf at that scene. So this is an icon that's left back for us to see. White lily. Again, I was experimenting with watercolor. Watercolor, I could say a word or two about watercolor here before I continue. You know, many artists, including myself, we saw watercolor as a very difficult, mysterious medium to paint with. And so we played it safe. How you would do watercolor is you'll do a charcoal sketch or a pencil sketch, very light pencil sketch. And then you will use the watercolor medium as an illustration medium. You just fill it in with color. And you're very careful that you don't offend the watercolor in any way and that it doesn't spoil your work or it doesn't run on you or do anything to disturb your painting, to mess you up, you say. But I as I got more mature and more adventurous with it, I started to realize that there's more to watercolor than just being illustrative. Now, how I came to that conclusion was because I had an experience with that left an indelible mark on me a long time ago. I was an artist, a freelance artist, and the Chinese embassy had brought in an artist, a Chinese artist, with an exhibition to Guyana at the Chinese embassy, cultural center. And I waited when the crowd was gone and everybody, it was after lunch, like 1, 2, 3 o'clock, when nobody was there, most people were gone, and I came in to see this artist, and he was there. We started to talk. Of course, he spoke very little English, and I knew no Chinese. But it was amazing. It's ironic and interesting that we had a conversation for over an hour in that setting. And he showed me a few techniques he used in watercolor. He told me he was a student for 15 years. He worked under a master, and he learned his technique. I didn't see him do much drawing, but he got images that would stun anyone to know that anybody can ever draw something like that. It was the paper that was doing the work for him. He took a large brush after he had soaked his paper, and he just slapped the brush a few times, And he made a few scratches with his fingernails and he's touched a few of his brush, flipped the paper, and then he let the paper just take charge of everything. I never thought that that was ever possible. When the guy was finished, there was this magnificent fowl cock or or beautiful fish or something. But if you see the detail and the texture and the feel of the paint, I was won over from then on. And later on in my career, even as I continue to do my watercolors, I always had that in the back of my mind that I would like to return to the days when I could, I wanted to do that. I wanted to achieve that Chinese technique. Eventually, I started to do it in little ways. I did experiments on my own, and I decided to come around it my way. And this painting is a collection of a number of my techniques, but the technique I used here basically is flooding, where you actually pour the paint on and you let the paint sit, and then you drop a color or two in it, and the paint will start walking for itself. In other words, you do the painting, but you coach the color to arrive at the image for you. And that's where I am at the moment with some of my experiments. I don't want to draw the paint draw the image 100%. I want the watercolor to work with me, and together we can achieve that. So I am trying I haven't gotten there fully yet, but here is one of my pieces.
Okay.
Here, this is called Pink Lotus. Uh, this basically, I'm getting deeper into my experimental watercolor, and I'm drawing with the brush, with a loaded brush. I'm drawing and feeling the paint as I go, and working with the paint in layers and layers, glazing and layering. Um, it's very large. It's 30 by 40, and it was like a total brush work done with a full brush, and I would sketch the scene and gradually work the scene in. So all the background and everything. The idea is to retain the fluidity of the paint, and at the same time still create the fluidity of the water in the image, and just glaze some of the light into it. There are only three colors that I use in my watercolors, and that is red, yellow, and blue. So there are layers and layers of color that arrived there, but all were done, let's say, basically about the same time as I layered and worked them into each other. The Pink Lotus. This is another one of the lilies, but this time I wanted to get some more texture, some more life, bring some more real life situation into it. It's the same technique, the flooding, the brush, and this time I included a technique called scratching or disturbing the surface of the paper to create some aging of the leaf itself, or the image itself. I just wanted to get the older leaves. I wanted to see if I can get it looking at these are more seasoned leaves than the ones that are behind. So I was trying to put a little bit of not only texture but age into it. just doing putting more life into the painting basically. This is called Morning Lily. The Croton. I had been doing a series of experiments in acrylic watercolor. Now the conventional watercolor, there are limitations of what you can achieve with them. Also, there are limitations what you can achieve with acrylic. I wanted to marry the two and see if I can achieve one with the other and the other with this one. And so this croton was done in acrylic. Now by that I mean I took the acrylic paint and I diluted it 50% water, really diluted it to watercolor consistency. And I painted it in layers, in layers, in layers. I chose this image, Croton, because that is the most beautiful, most dramatic way to challenge myself with this acrylic medium. Um, you will see the oranges and the reds and the leaves, and for those of you who know Croton, you will know Croton is just a kaleidoscope of greens, oranges, reds, and all those different colors in the veins and so on. So it was a meticulous back to the being careful and being safe in your illustration with the watercolor. It was very, very meticulous, but I enjoyed working on it, the Croton. Thank you. Now we are into another phase of my painting career called the later impastos. By later impastos, I mean that I did the painting at first with a brush. I did sketching. And after I had finished sketching and I laid the painting out, I would now go back into the painting and try to bring some three-dimensional forms into the painting. As you can see in the waves of these paintings, I had to actually take the knife and actually execute these waves. The stones on the wall were actually done in palette knife, getting the stones to be solid, and even the branches of the trees, most of them were done heavily with palette knife. So the clouds, of course, were left with brush, and occasionally I would just stick in a little bit of palette knife to like give it some dimension, and then I would glaze again. By glazing, I mean you do a thin film of oil paint, thin film of color, just to get over, to create a new color, or to give a new shade or whatever of the color. And then you will go back again with the palette knife and you work again. So it's like juxtaposing between one technique and another. The brush and the palette knife, the brush and the palette knife. So the later impasto paintings that you're going to see now involves this kind of technique of switching between palette knife and brush. And here you see that scene, Bennett Dam in Rossignol. I used to, when I started my teaching career as a trained teacher, I started first at Rossignol Secondary School, and I was visiting one of my students' parents, and so before I told him I'll be there at 5, but I came early at 4, and I sat on at the side of the road, and I sketched their house. And they saw me, but it didn't matter. They knew that I always do that. Everybody in the village knows that I do things like those. So I sat there and I sketched that house. It was sunset. I said, I'm going to do this painting. This is such a beautiful scene. Um, and it was sunset. So you could see the background. The sky is glazed to get the feeling of this rays of the sun just setting behind there and penetrating under the house. And what about getting that water reflection coming real at you? Those were the kinds of things that fascinated me about the country. And I was able to bring that out, I feel, in this painting the way I would like to bring it out. Now, the trees in front of the houses there, they were done in solid palette knife so that they looked almost lifelike in the picture. The shingles on the house were done individually with the palette knife because I wanted the texture of the palette knife. And those were the advantages I had working with both palette knife and brush. I was able to get the best of both worlds here. That is called Bend It Down. And this is one of my other favorites. It's a scene of Mahaica. If you're traveling to Berbice, Mahaica is about halfway between on your journey. And I used to admire this village. Simply, their main products of industry is coconut. So you see lots of coconut trees, and they produce some of the most fantastic craft pieces using the shell of the coconut, jewelry and all those kinds of things. Beautiful stuff. But every time I pass this area, I always love to see how the sun just works on the houses, these old traditional cottages. I don't think half of them would exist now. They would be gone, because that was about the 80s when I did those. But I wanted to achieve this painting using just the brush, go back to my old days when I used to draw with the brush. And so this painting was executed mainly with the brush. Very little palette knife. The only palette knife, some palette knife was done in the very corner, just in the foreground of the painting. But the painting, I wanted to use heavy brush impasto and go back to those days when I would paint with the brush. I think I got it, because the light, I came back over to capture the light. I came back over with yellow and with white and brought up the light of the sun, and I thought I got the mood of Mahaica Thorn. Now this is another view of the watercolor house by the river. This one is called Meadowbank Coker, and a very popular scene for artists. Most of us will be painting that scene. I have done this maybe 20, 30 times, but I wanted this to be my my final rendition of the scene. That coker may exist at the moment, but the house does not. I was trying to capture the feel of the water. The challenge here, I was trying to capture the early morning with the light now coming. It is like very early, 6 in the morning or earlier. And when the first light comes in and the water is still and the reflection the rays of this sunlight just skidding over the water, even where you are seeing their reflections. Now it was a difficult task to achieve with painting, but I wanted to achieve it because I wanted to see what can be achieved with oil paint. Um, I think I got it to some extent. Maybe some of our young artists can now take it to the next level, and I hope this is a stimulation to get them to take up the challenge just as much as I took it up for myself. Another moonlight, and a later impasto. This um, earlier I mentioned that a friend of mine, he challenged me. He said it's impossible to do moonlight. So after I had done that other one a couple of years before, I decided to go back again and take another shot at it, and I did this moonlight. This is breadfruit tree in the moonlight. Now I had actually experienced this. Um, I I in my early years in high school, where I lived, there was a breadfruit tree right in front of our yard, and whenever there is moonlight, I would really admire what this tree looked like in the moonlight. Later on, when I started visiting Guyana occasionally, uh, I came and one of the places I was staying had a breadfruit tree, and I studied it again there. So what I actually did with this painting, I took the study of the breadfruit and I made up my own scene. And I wanted to play with the palette knife and bring in the moonlight and see how best you could bring out the moonlight, both with brush and with palette, doing a palette mixture. Now, on the ground, you will notice some flowers. I actually worked those flowers out with a dark palette using the yellow from the moonlight. I would add the touches of light into it. So I was merely playing around trying to get the feel, the mood, to see if I can take my moonlight study to the next level. And it is true. Moonlight is a challenging topic to do in landscape, but it's also very, very fulfilling and enjoyable. And this scene is called Entrance, Entrance to the Botanical Gardens, Zoo Entrance to the Botanical Gardens. You will see me going back heavily into my impasto, my early impasto. Near to the entrance there, you will see the heavy laden. The entire painting was done in sketch. It was sketched first with a brush. It was a brush sketch, and after it was done, I knew that it couldn't stay as a brush because, to me, rendered in brush, it looked very, very pale. So I got down to work, and I started to lift the painting and give it another dimension. And even the water, I wanted to see if I can achieve the flow of the water and the reflections with the palette knife. Now, I'm not sure I got it as I would have liked, but that is where I am working at the moment. Getting the feel of the paint causing the ripple in the water. And so, yes, the top of the painting is very solid, very, very solid, but I wanted the water to be just a little more liquid. So this is the conclusion of the first part of the Guyana series. There will be a second part. I am working on those. And of course, you know, the experimentation and the studio techniques will be are refining all the time. So look forward to seeing a very dramatic part two, which is the final part of the Guyana series. There will be a few interesting studies that you may want to see, especially in the impasto, because I want to go back more into my impasto as I used to. I used to enjoy working with that, and I want to take that also to the next level. It will be, in some cases, a little more raised, a little more defined, and the watercolors, I already whet your appetite about what I hope to achieve with my watercolor, a kind of rhythm, dancing. It's like dancing, compromise with the color and the water and the paper uh, to get some interesting effects. Um, so look forward to seeing what will happen in my part two of the Guyana series. Now I can be reached at my website, uh, Bluesaki, that is BLUESACKIE, bluesaki.com. That's my website. And if you guys want to email me, you could email me on BLU this time, SAKI at snet.net. That's how you can get me. Again, the email is BLUSAKI at snet.net. Thank you.